Olá, muito bom dia. Eu pedia que se fossem sentando. Vamos começar daqui a 30 segundos. Quando puder, não? Olá, muito bom dia, muito bem-vindos a todos, aos colegas aqui presentes e aos colegas que estão a assistir pelo canal de YouTube da OCC, à apresentação da revista de Contabilidade e Gestão e o lançamento da sua edição especial. Eu vou aqui, em termos de introdução, tanto eu, como também todos os oradores intervenientes, tendo em conta que os dois keynotes vão fazer as suas intervenções em inglês, por isso vamos andar aqui a navegar entre o português e o inglês, acreditando que todos se vão certamente entender-nos. So welcome everyone who are here in person and who the ones are watching the broadcast live that we are doing it at the OCC YouTube channel, to the Accounting and Management Review and the Special Issue presentation. The topic of today's discussion is challenges posed to accounting and accounting research in present and future. So, o tema principal hoje que nos reúne, além da apresentação da revista de Contabilidade e de Gestão e da sua edição especial, o tema principal é os desafios da contabilidade e pesquisa em contabilidade, agora e no futuro. I would like to start with the opening session. A sessão de abertura começa agora mesmo com a Presidente da OCC, a Sra. Bastonária Dra. Paula Franco, the OCC President, and the Editor-Chief of Accounting and Management Review, a editora da revista de Contabilidade e Gestão, a Professora Maria João Major.
Muito bom dia a todos, sejam bem-vindos. Mais uma vez é um orgulho enorme estarmos nesta casa, na nossa Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados, a relançar este projeto. Como sabemos, do ponto de vista científico, estes projetos têm uma importância enorme para o estudo da contabilidade e desenvolvimento da contabilidade e também da gestão. Hoje é realmente um dia muito feliz em que relançamos esta nossa revista com a edição de um número especial que vem precisamente dar outra vez o mote para que tudo isto seja e tenha um seguimento em que nos possamos orgulhar da nossa revista científica. Como em qualquer área, para além das revistas técnicas, uma revista científica é fundamental e aquilo que pretendemos hoje com este relançamento é que esta revista nos traga para a mira internacional dos melhores artigos científicos daquilo que é publicado a nível destas áreas. E por isso é com muito prazer hoje que estou aqui a apresentar e a relançar este dia. Cumprimento a professora Maria João Major, que está aqui comigo para esta sessão de abertura, que é a editora-chefe desta revista, responsável por tudo aquilo que foi produzido em conjunto com algumas pessoas que nos vão orgulhar de todo este projeto que temos aqui. Eu diria e destacaria aqui alguns nomes que estão na parte da própria edição da revista, em que gostaria só de relembrar e de me referir ao Dr. Carlos Menezes, que é também o diretor executivo desta revista. Gostaria também de evidenciar os outros diretores associados, a professora Delfina Gomes, a professora Ruta Abreu, a professora Susana Jorge, tão bem conhecidas de todos nós e que pela sua excelência em termos de artigos científicos e excelência em termos profissionais e que por isso tem tudo para correr bem este projeto. Temos também um conselho editorial com mais de 30 investigadores de renome, que aqui não os vou mencionar a todos, mas que desde já agradeço o terem aceitado o convite para fazerem parte deste grande projeto e para o tornar realmente a revista de referência a nível internacional daquilo que são estas matérias. Sem dúvida que estes projetos nos trazem aquilo que queremos para a nossa instituição, para a nossa profissão, que é de facto cada vez mais a contabilidade ser algo que, para além de ser uma ciência, trazer-nos a evolução necessária para o nosso país e para a nossa economia com aquilo que tão bem se sabe fazer em Portugal e no estrangeiro e que todos nós consigamos contribuir dessa forma. Dou também as boas-vindas a todos os que estão aqui presentes, aos órgãos sociais da Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados, aos membros e aos senhores convidados aqui presentes e que nos estão a acompanhar, quer presencialmente, quer à distância. Cumprimento também os nossos oradores, e aqui uma palavra especial, good morning to all, to accept our invitation, and thank you for your presence of the two speakers that we have, Trevor and Alan. They are not Portuguese, so they will speak in English. And thank you for your presence in our conference. Welcome. You are all very welcome. Thank you. E esta conferência segue precisamente com 2 oradores que são ingleses, mas creio que vão enriquecer, e tenho a certeza que vão enriquecer muito este projeto. Muitos membros têm questionado o porquê da revista, que se chama Revista de Contabilidade e Gestão, e em inglês Accounting and Management Review, porque é que é feita em inglês, e nós vamos ter uma versão em inglês e em português. Ela tem uma versão em inglês porque é uma revista internacional e, por isso, a língua que é usada do ponto de vista internacional para este tipo de artigos é o inglês, e por isso é isso que vamos respeitar, precisamente para que a nossa revista seja uma das maiores referências a nível internacional. Mas também, e porque somos portugueses e porque isto é uma organização portuguesa, faremos questão de que cada número tenha também uma versão em português, com os artigos traduzidos para a língua portuguesa. É realmente aquilo que devemos fazer, é tentar chegar a todos e tentar que, dentro daquilo que é o respeito de uma revista internacional, seja também uma revista de uma ordem portuguesa, e por isso mesmo vamos fazer questão de ter as 2 situações em simultâneo. Não tenho mais a acrescentar, estarei aqui na sessão de encerramento para acompanhar. Não tenho dúvida que este tema dos desafios da contabilidade e pesquisa em contabilidade agora e no futuro são temas que nos vão deixar aqui a pensar e a refletir. Estas conferências servem exatamente para isso, e a reflexão é algo que nos faz crescer, que nos faz amadurecer e que nos faz, acima de tudo, desenvolver as nossas competências tão necessárias a nível profissional. E por isso é que todos estes projetos são importantes, porque com estes projetos é que temos o crescimento, a consolidação e o verdadeiro reconhecimento daquilo que é a contabilidade, e por isso, com isto tudo, queremos contribuir para ainda mais termos um reconhecimento a nível geral. Muito obrigada mais uma vez pela vossa presença. Welcome, Alan and Trevor. E vamos seguir agora com a nossa conferência. Muito obrigada e sejam todos bem-vindos.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. I would like to call Professora Maria João Major, the Editor-Chief of Accounting and Management Review, for her opening remarks. Professora Maria João Major, para a sua sessão de abertura.
Muito bom dia a todos. É um prazer enorme estar aqui convosco hoje. Começo por agradecer a vossa presença neste evento em que celebramos o lançamento da revista de Contabilidade e Gestão. Celebramos também a publicação do seu primeiro Special Issue, que é subordinado ao tópico Desafios, Oportunidades e Direções em Contabilidade. Gostaria de referir que a revista tem uma natureza científica, como a senhora bastonária teve a oportunidade de mencionar, e uma dimensão internacional, e que por essa razão começámos por escrever este primeiro Special Issue em língua inglesa, mas que muito em breve poderão contar também com o Special Issue traduzido em língua portuguesa, para que possam também, com provavelmente maior acessibilidade, maior facilidade, ler os artigos, portanto, que se encontram contemplados nesta edição especial. Dado que temos diversos participantes a acompanhar-nos no stream, portanto online, que não são portugueses, eu pediria a vossa permissão para falar, portanto, em língua inglesa, agradecendo desde já. Thank you very much to attend this session, which seeks to present the Accounting and Management Review, Revista de Contabilidade e Gestão, and its special issue on challenges, opportunities and directions in accounting. This event seeks to signal the relaunch of the Accounting and Management Review, AMR, which since June 2021 has been under a new editorial team and management body. I start by thanking Dra. Paula Franco the chairwoman of the Portuguese Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ordem Contabilistas Certificados, for her invitation to become the editor-in-chief of the AMR. I trust and believe that the Accounting and Management Review plays an important role in promoting and disseminating high-quality research in accounting that has the potential to contribute not only to theory, but to solve problems in society and world has been paramount. So I'm really grateful to you, Dra. Paula Franco, for all your support from the very beginning. This is really important to me. Also, I'm very grateful to Professor Carlos Menezes, which is there, the managing director and also an associate editor of the journal, for his support in setting the strategy for AMR and providing the needed resources to the project. Thank you so much. The launch of AMR is a collective endeavor. Its success depends on the effort and engagement of an important number of people who have been working hard on this project since day one. Without the work and enthusiasm of the associate editors of the journal, Professor Carlos Menezes, Professor Delfina Gomes, which is there, Professor Ruth Abreu, and Professor Susana Jorge, which is coming. She's not here, but she's coming to join us. The launch of the AMR would not have been possible. So I would like to ask you, please, to join me on this floor. This floor is yours, not mine, to be honest. Also, I'm very grateful to Duarte Camacho, which is also somewhere there, who has prepared this fantastic cover that you have with you for AMR, and who has put a lot of his time to produce the first special issue of the Accounting and Management Review. The work of the new editorial team started with development of a new electronic platform to manage the submission and publication of manuscripts, with this initiative revealing more challenging than we thought at the beginning, I must say. In this respect, I would like to thank Eduardo Oliveira and Professor Ruth Abreu for their time and effort in development of AMR platform. I'm now proud to announce that after more than 1 year of hard work, the journal platform is ready to be accessed, and that manuscripts can be submitted for publication through it. Also, I would like to mention that the support that the AMR has attracted amongst academics, both in Portugal and overseas, and practitioners following its relaunch, has been of great importance. And that without this support, we couldn't be here today. So thank you very much for every support that you gave us. In particular, I would like to thank Professor Gary Carnegie from RMIT University in Australia for its inspirational conversations and support through all stages of this project. I think it's fair to say that this project is also a bit of him. The support AMR has received from accounting academia is translated in distinguished list of reviewers that integrate the editorial advisory board of the journal, and that includes scholars from a wide range of countries, such as Portugal, the UK, Italy, Germany, Australia, Brazil, Spain, and Sweden. Also of top importance for putting in motion our project are the authors that wrote for AMR Special Issue on the theme of challenges, opportunities, and directions in accounting. Professor Lee Parker, Professor Ingrid Trozani, Professor Alan Sangster, Professor Gary Carnegie, Professor Ken McPhail, Professor Christopher Napier, Professor Zaira Oak, Professor Niam Brennan, and Professor Doris Merkel Davis. AMR is deeply thankful to you for publishing your important work in our journal and for your collaboration with us. So thank you very much to you. Before finishing, a special word to our two special guest speakers. I'm very grateful to Professor Trevor Hopper and Professor Alan Sangster for accepting AMR invitation to come over from the UK to Lisbon and to participate in this event, sharing some of your thoughts and knowledge with us today. Thank you so much. It is indeed an enormous honor to have you here today to celebrate together the rebirth of the Accounting and Management Review. And before finishing, I would like to thank Paulo Francisco, the editorial assistant of the Accounting and Management Review, whose dedication and administrative support to the development of the journal has been critical. And Professor Cláudia Teixeira, who with her SCAP accounting webinar series has contributed to the topic we have decided for the AMR first special issue. I conclude, because this is being already too long, so I'm just finishing what I'd like to say in my introduction. I'll conclude by showing a video in which members of our editorial advisory board describe how do they regard the potential contribution of AMR for a more fairer society and better world. And by wishing you a very pleasant and fruitful morning. Thank you very much all.
As we've said in our paper, it needs to be addressing the big issues that concern communities and people and governments and business outside purely a technical accounting and professional management community focus. We are really there to serve the broader communities. Second, we need to be publishing, we think, in ANMR research that draws on multiple disciplines that holistically address the issues they face. It's never purely a technical issue. Most issues we face in society are partly technical, partly cultural, partly historic, partly institutional, and we need to take that on board through ANMR. We also think that a journal such as AMR can require researchers and authors of its papers to tackle the societal, institutional, and environmental implications of the findings and conclusions they produce. It is a broader responsibility of the researcher to point out what those broader implications of their immediate research study findings are. And finally, we think that ANMR has the potential to commission both papers and special issues that try to bridge the gap that often exists today between accounting and management research and accounting and management practice.
Yes, well, I think accounting is not necessarily well known for creating a better world, but I think if accounting is seen as a technical, social and moral practice, and it takes into account not just organisations, but enables the flourishing of organisations, people and nature, then I believe accounting can indeed shape a better world. Accounting can make humans and non-humans alike have a better existence. And as we know, there's no planet B, so we must look after the planet we've got, and accounting can do a lot more.
We don't want our messages about how the world can be made a better place to be lost because they're poorly structured and poorly communicated. And this is where a journal such as the journal we're looking at today, Accounting and Management Review, can help because it can provide openings for research that doesn't necessarily stick to a rigid paradigm that can be found in other journals. It can be a journal that is open to a wider range of scholars from different backgrounds and can adopt a diverse agenda so that it's not just focused on a specific mode of research.
Thank you very much, Sra. Bastonária, Professora Maria João Major. Não, professora, fica. E agora passávamos à apresentação da revista Accounting and Management Review e do lançamento da sua edição especial com a editora, a professora Maria João Major, a quem eu peço que passe literalmente aqui para o púlpito. So now, in English, if you allow me, we are now going to invite again Professora Maria João Major, the editor-chief of the journal, to take the stage and to present the Accounting and Management Review and the special issue. Please, take the floor. Thank you very much.
So back to the... back to the stage. So I will speak again in English. I will present now AMR and its platform, and my presentation is comprised of two parts. First, I will start by presenting the journal and the platform, as I mentioned before, and secondly, I will move to the presentation of the special issue and the authors that have contributed to the special issue. So I'll start with an overview of AMR and its platform. The platform is comprised of 7 sections. One section, the first one, called About Journal, where we provide basic information about journal, its mission, values, and scope. Then there is a second section called Submissions, where all the process of submission of manuscripts is described. Then there is information on the editorial team in section number 3. Then you can get in platform the current issue and also all the previous and old issues of the journal. There is also a section for announcements and finally contacts. So I will move to the section about the journal. In the section about the journal, as you can see, you can get information about the aims and scope of the journal. And it's important at this stage that I say to you that AMR seeks to publish high-quality quantitative and qualitative research. So both types of research are very important to us, not just one of them, on accounting and also on management. And the journal draws on, I would say, a wide variety of theoretical and methodological perspectives. So we are open to different ways of doing research, not just a single one. And the journal aims to be a platform for researchers and practitioners, as I said before, to disseminate knowledge in the wide fields of accounting and management, and we are welcoming submissions of original research papers relating to any country or region, and both in public and private sectors, I would like to mention as well. We have also embraced 5, I would say, main values for the journal. These values are very important because every time we need to make decisions, we go back to our values, and this gives us some inspiration to continue our work. So first value consists of well-synergized research, theory, and practice. This is very important. We want to be close to practice and practitioners. We don't want just to embrace theory. So this is really important, to bridge practice and theory. Secondly, engagement with community. We want to help to solve problems of organizations and society. Third, promotion of sustainable development. So this is also a core value to us, to contribute for a more sustainable world. Fourth value consists of production research that has an impact on society and the world. So as I mentioned before, we want to contribute for the betterment of society and the world. This is also a very important objective for the journal. And last but not least, industry responsiveness. Regarding our mission, so our mission embraces all these aspects that I have just mentioned and can be summarized as it follows. So we aim to foster high-impact research on practice at the interface of accounting and management that reach multiple audience, including obviously academics, but also, as I mentioned before, practitioners, accountants, policymakers, and managers in public and private sectors, and in different regions and countries. So we don't want to be closed just to a country. We want to be open to the world. And we have a particular interest in research that can contribute to the good of society and the betterment of worlds, as I said before. Regarding the submissions, how to submit manuscripts to AMR. So we have prepared this submission preparation checklist, which you can find in the platform, and also some information about the ethics policy adopted for the journal, the third-party copyright permissions, also manuscript submission requirements with detailed author guidelines, and also some information on the copyright and the final manuscript proving. About our editorial team, I would like to say that AMR is comprised of three main bodies. The first body is called Managing Board, and it includes Doutora Paula Franco, the chairwoman of Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados, as the director, and also as the executive director, Professor Carlos Menezes from University of Minho. Then there is the editorial board, where we can find the associate editors, Professor Carlos Menezes, Professor Delfina Gomes from University of Minho, Professor Ruth Abreu from Polytechnic Institute of Guarda, and Professor Susana Jorge from University of Coimbra. Also, I'm very proud to count on this very, I would say, impressive editorial advisory boards. So we have 30 I would say, distinguished professors that are working with the journal and that are providing us with their advice and always helpful to revise and to help in the revision of the manuscripts that are submitted to the journal. As I said before, you can find on the platform not just the current issue, but also all the past issues. So I invite you to browse the platform of the Accounting and Management Review and to have a look on our publications. Also, there is a section on the announcements where we'll be publishing periodically information on the events related to the journal. So I'll move now to the special issue. So I'm very honored to tell you that the special issue, which has this title, Challenges, Opportunities and Directions in Accounting, is comprised of 7 very interesting manuscripts, which I would like to invite you to read and to go through them. I'm sure that you'll learn a lot and that you'll reinforce your understanding on accounting practice. And the first article has been written by Lee Parker and Ingrid Trozani and is entitled Pursuing Big Issues in COVID World Accounting Research. Then there is a second article written by Alan Sangster that is with us today, entitled Revolutionizing the Accounting Curriculum in Higher Education, a Vision of the Future. Then there is the article written by Gary Carnegie, entitled Global University Rankings, the Macro-Micro Contradiction in Public University Management. The fourth has been written by Ken MacPhail from the University of Manchester, and it is called From Stakeholder to Rights Holder Perspectives, to United Nations Guiding Principles and Sustainable Development Goals, and New Paradigms for Corporate Accountability. Then there is this article written by Christopher Napier, Authorizing Can Enhance Historical Accounting Research. Also, we have the contribution of Zaire Oak, which has written this manuscript with the title Outcome Budgets in Government Entities, Rhetoric or a Reality. And last but not least, there is the article of Niam Brennan and Doris Merkel-Davies with the title Discretionary Accounting Narratives in Contemporary Corporate Reporting, Review and Framework. So as you can see, in the special issue, we are embracing many different topics. And because I believe that is better that the authors themselves explain what is the key message of their articles for the special issue, we have challenged them to summarize in a short video the key message of their articles. So I invite you to see this video.
The key message in the paper that we have provided to the special issue is captured, I think, in the title of the paper, Pursuing Big Issues in COVID World Accounting Research. Because despite what politicians and communities may think, we know that COVID world is still with us, and it's probably with us for a few more years yet, and will have very long-term ramifications for communities and governments and business and institutions and populations generally. I think the key message in Indrit and my paper is that we really need to address the accounting research practice gap. And one could say that's the case very much in the management discipline as well. There is a lot of research in our fields that has and does address major issues that concern communities and governments, but which doesn't always translate through to communities and policymakers and practitioners. And that is a gap that we really need to address. The important areas that we selected, amongst many, that we think need urgent attention are public sector services and accountability. Also, of course, social and environmental accountability and sustainability has been something that's been building up for decades. It's now of dramatic urgency for communities around the world, and it's something where specialist accounting researchers have been attending to it ever since the 1970s, but it needs even more attention now. We also cover the area of digital transformation, because as we move into digital economies, there are huge ramifications for accounting processes and reporting practices. And finally, our paper looks at the transition to the hybrid office.
As it gets to the heart of accounting, what is accounting? And I have a project on the way with other colleagues about this, where we're trying to come up with a new definition of accounting. And it's along these lines: accounting is a technical, social and moral practice concerned with the sustainable utilisation of resources and proper accountability to stakeholders to enable the flourishing of organisations, people and nature. So that means accounting is not just a technical practice. It's also a social practice, and it's a moral practice. And whatever we do in accounting in the world, at a university or at a professional body, it has implications for people. So just like we might act or not act in a given circumstances, when accounting acts or doesn't act, it has implications in the same way. And this project is about performance measurement in public universities, where I argue that global university rankings and the huge array of KPIs that make up these rankings give us a micro contributions approach to university management, where we tend to forget the macro or the macro contributions approach, which is based on benefit to society, public interest, advancement of nation, and so on. And it's where universities focus more on attaining their visions or meeting their missions and attaining their visions.
In my paper, How Theorization Can Enhance Historical Accounting Research, I was trying to address the problem that many researchers, particularly qualitative researchers, face when they're asked, what's the theoretical contribution of your study? Many of us, when we do research, want to develop ideas that can have an influence on making the world a better place. And so we tend to focus on our particular case that we examine, whether that's a case in the present or perhaps some past historical episode. But theory can help the researcher in a number of different ways. And in my paper, I suggest that theory can serve several different objectives. So, for example, theory can help us to provide an initial framework for the study that we want to undertake and give us ideas about how to use a particular historical archive or other types of record. And then it can help us identify potentially important variables, things that might have an impact on our study, things that may turn out to be important. Theory can suggest some existing concepts that are out there that have been used and have been tested in other contexts, and we might want to see the extent to which these concepts help us in understanding our specific study. Theory also allows us to have a degree of creativity, because we don't need to just take existing concepts and existing ideas about how these concepts are related. We can test them and refine them in the light of our findings. And then finally, theory is helpful in structuring a narrative, in telling the story we want to tell. And so theory isn't necessarily a straitjacket. It isn't necessarily something that constrains the researcher. In fact, it can provide a framework within which research can thrive.
Since Doris and I have been working together, we have taken her expertise in linguistics and in communication, and we have imported ideas from that literature into accounting. And using that interdisciplinary approach, we have been able to find opportunities to make a unique contribution to the literature and get published in reasonably good journals. Our first paper together is focused on accounting narratives, discretionary disclosures. The paper is Discretionary Disclosure Strategies in Corporate Narratives, Incremental Information or Impression Management. And that paper was published in the Journal of Accounting Literature in 2007. And it has received a great deal of traction, I'm happy to tell you, and has almost 1,000 citations on Google Scholar. Accounting narratives, discretionary disclosure research, we mainly adopt a preparer perspective. For our paper in the special issue of Accounting and Management Review, titled Discretionary Accounting Narratives in Contemporary Corporate Reporting Review and Framework, It's similar to our Journal of Accounting Literature paper in that we conduct a literature review of research on discretionary disclosure narratives. But to give the paper an original angle, we have taken Christine Wiedmann's 2000 paper containing her 3-component framework. Her 3 components are disclosure environment first, second disclosure attributes, and thirdly disclosure impacts. And in our paper, we label those antecedents, characteristics, and consequences.
Thank you very much. So before concluding, I would like just to mention that the Accounting and Management Review is on LinkedIn, so please follow us. Your support is very important, and I would like to thank you again and look forward to your submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professora Maria João Major. We are sure that the journal is going to be a success and is going to help a lot the development of accounting and management. Muito obrigado, Professora Maria João Major. Estamos certos que a revista vai ser um sucesso no desenvolvimento da ciência de contabilidade e de gestão. We are going now for a small break of half an hour. Vamos agora para um intervalo de meia hora, de pequena duração. And we are restarting our works at 11:30. Retomamos os nossos trabalhos às 11:30. Muito obrigado. Só para dizer para sentar. Olá, muito bom dia novamente. Peço a todos que se sentem. Vamos começar dentro de um minutinho. Já estamos online? Já estamos online? Okay. Espero que... Vamos então iniciar a segunda parte dos nossos trabalhos. Espero que o coffee break tenha estado do vosso agrado. Para quem está em casa, bem-vindo novamente à segunda parte. Welcome to everyone. I hope that you were able to re-energize during the coffee break. And now is the time to have our two keynotes. Trevor Hopper, Emeritus Professor of the University of Sussex Business School, and Professor Alan Sangster, sharing accounting history of the University of Aberdeen. The topic is challenges posed to accounting and accounting research in present and future. Chegamos então à parte principal destes trabalhos da manhã, com os dois nossos oradores principais, que, sob o tema Os Desafios da Contabilidade e Pesquisa em Contabilidade Agora e no Futuro, vão abordar o tema. Os professores são o professor Trevor Hopper, professor emérito da Universidade de Sussex, e o professor Alan Sangster, professor da Universidade de Aberdeen. Para apresentar uma breve nota curricular sobre cada um dos professores, chamava a professora Delfina Gomes, da Universidade do Minho, e a professora Susana Jorge, da Universidade de Coimbra. A professora Delfina Gomes, que nos vai apresentar a nota bibliográfica do professor Trevor Hopper, e a professora Susana Jorge, que nos vai apresentar a nota bibliográfica do professor Alan Sangster. I would like to call to stage Professor Delfina Gomes from the University of Minho and Professor Susana Jorge, the University of Coimbra. They are going to do a small bio presentation of Professor Trevor Hopper and Professor Alan Sangster. Please. Vitória.
Muito bom dia a todos. É um prazer estar aqui e é uma honra fazer parte deste projeto que a Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados está a patrocinar. Isto é muito importante. Enquanto académica, é muito relevante para mim este projeto, é muito importante para toda a academia, mas é, acima de tudo, importante para a ligação entre academia e práticos. E é isso que nós queremos contribuir no nosso país, a nível nacional, e também projetar a nível internacional. Eu vou apresentar uma pequena biografia, mesmo uma pequena biografia, do que é o trabalho do professor Trevor Hopper, e vou fazê-lo em inglês. So I will present a short biography of Professor Trevor Hopper and his contribution to accounting and accounting research, which is quite significant, but as a biography and a short biography, I will just highlight a few points. But it will be enough so that you be aware of the relevance of the guest speaker that we have. Then Professor Alan will be introduced by my colleague. So, Professor Trevor Hopper is Emeritus Professor of Management Accountant at Sussex University and an honorary professor at Victoria University of Wellington and Essex University. Previously, he was a cost accounting in industry, a lecturer at Wolverhampton and Sheffield Universities, and a professor at Manchester Business School. He has co-edited 8 books, including a handbook of accounting in developing countries and issues in management accounting, and has published over 100 articles in major accounting journals, covering topics like accounting, management, and sociology journals. And he's also published book chapters, and his publications are very diversified, covering management control, accounting theory, accounting and development, accounting education, accounting history, corruption, and sustainability. The empirical contributions, because it's not only at a higher level of research, he has also practical and empirical contributions, are mainly intensive case studies, cover countries like Bangladesh, Benin, Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Tanzania, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Japan, USA, Portugal, and the UK. Professor Hopper co-founded the Interdisciplinary Perspectives on Accounting Conference and co-headed the British Accounting Review, and has a guest editor numerous special issues in leading accounting journals. He is an editorial board member of several relevant journals in our field. His visiting academic appointments span from the US, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, Netherlands, France, Sweden, and Indonesia. He has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the British Accounting and Finance Association and the Global Accounting and Organizational Change Network. Also the Platinum Award from the African Accounting and Finance Association and an honorary doctorate from Stockholm School of Economics. And also the membership of the Interdisciplinary Accounting Hall of Fame. So you can imagine the importance that he has given during a long time period for accounting and accounting research. Please.
I shall present Helen first. Bom dia a todos, muito obrigada. Também queria agradecer o convite para estar aqui e dizer que é com muito gosto, tal como a professora Delfina, que abraço este projeto de relançar esta revista, na qual estive desde o início e, portanto, digamos que é um duplo prazer. Vou também mudar para inglês para fazer a apresentação do professor Alan Sangster e, tal como a professora Delfina, apenas vou destacar alguns aspectos do seu vasto currículo. Now in English, good morning everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here to embrace this project with Dr. Paula Franco and Professor Maria Major. And I would like to also to congratulate the OCC for this connection with the academia, because we don't see professional institutes to do this every day. And it's now my duty to present Professor Alan Sangster. I will just highlight a few lines of his CV because it's, again, like Delfina just highlighted, a very vast CV, so I just highlight a few of his awards and achievements. Alan Sangster is Professor of Accounting History at the University of Aberdeen, and in 2022 he was awarded American Accounting Association Outstanding Educator. He's Editor-in-Chief of Accounting Education, Deputy Chair of the British Accounting and Finance Association, particularly the Accounting History Special Interest Group, which he founded, and he was past chair of the British Accounting Association Accounting Education Special Interest Group. He was also expert of the Emerging Technologies section of the AAA. He was chair for Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland of the UK Board of Accreditation of Accounting Education Courses, and a member of the panel that produced the first UK subject benchmarking statement for accounting. He has taught in Australia, Brazil, England, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. He has a lot of publications, but I highlighted 8 textbooks, 4 research books, 20 book chapters, and more than 80 referred articles in high-ranked journals. His other awards include the Hourglass Award of the Academy of Accounting Historians, the Lifetime Achievement Award of the British Accounting and Finance Association, and with our late friend, Professor Lúcia Lima Rodrigues, the Prémio Henrique Fernandes Peña de História de Contabilidade in 2014. From the Associação Espanhola de Contabilidade e Administração de Empresas. So, Alan, thank you so much for your contribution to our journal and for being with us today, and we look forward to hear your keynote speech. Thank you so much.
Button up forward, button down backward, okay? So, I see, yeah, I'll master it. Okay. That's forward. This is the ponto, okay? Yeah. Oh, I see, I'm with you, yeah, okay. Can you hear me fine? Right, okay. Well, thank you for inviting me here. And the first time I was in Portugal was just after the revolution. And the changes here are absolutely remarkable. There was widespread poverty when I was here, particularly from refugees. But there is just one thing I'd like to comment on. When we were here then, most of the women, particularly the young women, were chaperoned and didn't seem to be have a great deal of influence in commerce and major activities. And what a delight it is to see so many women now involved. It's unbelievable, the changes that have happened in Portugal over that time. And I'd also like to compliment the founding of this journal. Much of what I will talk about is already covered by many of the comments made by the previous speakers, who are friends of mine and who I agree with, and I heartily recommend reading the articles in this special edition. It seems a wonderful collection, and I can't wait to read them. So, what I've decided to do, rightly or wrongly, is I was asked to, some of the challenges posed in accounting and accounting research present and the future. I don't like specifying topics that you, in other words, you should be researching this, you should be researching that. My approach always has been to get close to practice and see what the issues are, and then work out from there the theory and the issues. So I'm going to really talk about issues at the interface. Let's see if this works. Yeah, fine. Seems to go the same way at whichever which. Right, hang on. Yeah, I need to go back to the first page. It's that one. Right, so this is back.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to talk about issues at the interface of the academic, the profession, and practitioner knowledge. And I want to take 4 topics quickly. The knowledge base of each group, the way they diffuse knowledge, the way they produce knowledge, the interests they serve, and forms of regulation over them. And very quickly, in academia, we pride ourselves in producing knowledge on a scientific basis. That is, it's tested empirically and it has some underlying theory to it. Whereas the profession, although it may utilize this information, tends to be based more on legal and technical expertise, whereas practice is based very much on pragmatic solutions. And there's nothing wrong with this. I'm not decrying this. If it works, and I know as a practitioner myself, if it works and it's effective, you're very interested in it. And our channels of diffusion differ quite a bit. In academia, our role is to society and to students. The profession, primarily through their members, through higher examination, through higher education examination, whereas knowledge in the private sector, especially rather than the government sector, tends to be private. And academics want knowledge production, I put inverted commas, truth through original research, and they want freedom of inquiry, whereas much of the profession has primarily, much of their knowledge has been produced within by their own internal reports. By the way, I ought to say I'm basing my experience mainly on my interactions and knowledge of professions, particularly in the UK and the States. Interestingly enough, when I've worked in smaller countries such as Sweden and New Zealand, relations between academia and the profession tend to be better. I think sometimes there's advantages in being a relatively small country. And in the private sector, there were systems that give them competitive advantage. And there can be conflicts over the interests served. As academics, our duty is primarily, or should be, primarily to serve the public interest, the profession, the public interest, but also that of its members, whereas in the private sector, firms and their interests primarily serving private interests, or in the case of the government, the interests of the government department, and different forms of regulation over each. No doubt in Portugal we have performance evaluations based on publications and things of that nature, whereas in the profession it's governed by, or should be governed by a code of ethics, self-regulation, and in the private sector the concern is market criteria. I'm mastering this. Right, let's look at some of the challenges concerning the knowledge base. And increasingly, I've noticed an increasing differentiation between the knowledge base between academic and the profession and practitioners. As the previous speakers on the presentations, such as Lee Parker and Carnegie, mentioned, the topics in academic accounting have become much, much broader. A huge amount of work on SDGs, sustainability, but also, in my area, change and implementation of new accounting systems, growth of critical public interest accounting, and also accountability. And it's got to remember, when I started my research as a young researcher, I was very interested in behavioural aspects and to some extent social and environmental accounting. And it was quite difficult for me to get a job because this is not accounting. Now, much of that stuff is in the mainstream. And one of the things is, there's a long time lag between what appears in academia and in research and its incorporation into bodies of professional and practice knowledge. And this is something that needs speeding up and better addressing. And I'm delighted to see how this professional association is attempting to address this. One of the problems has been that the professional knowledge has often been, I would argue, unduly technical and practice-based, often quite narrow topics based on technical matters, and often with a relatively short-term orientation. And so quite narrow boundaries, very often atheoretical and sometimes legal and experiential. And this raises issues for accounting professions worldwide. I'm always a little bit reluctant with respect to call accounting a profession in the neo-Weberian sense. I think it would be better seen as a quasi-profession or a trade. Because one of the big issues in many accounting professions is it lacks or pays insufficient attention to its theoretical base and the empirically tested knowledge on much of its practices. So there are major issues, such as some of the previous speakers were mentioned, about what is accounting. And as some of the previous speakers in the presentations intimated, a lot of academic research now is using theories on topics only marginally or not at all contained in the profession's knowledge base. And as I mentioned previously, there's a long time lag between incorporating new research topics into professional and higher education syllabuses. I'll come back to this. So I think as academics, I think we are far too conservative in what we teach. I'll come back to this. And one of the issues confronting the accounting profession is there is increasing intrusion of other managerial functions into much accounting work. For example, ERP systems require people with good computer skills, good IT. I'll come back again this later. The point is that this has always been the case, but as increasingly becoming so, that accounting really now is just one part of being part of a problem-solving management team. And the most important thing is, as well as accounting knowledge, the ability to collaborate in multidisciplinary groups. Right. So, diffusion. Challenges facing knowledge diffusion. As I've mentioned, higher education and professional syllabuses often neglect research. And this is rather paradoxical, because sometimes there is a failure also to respond to occupational changes and employer demands. As we know, automation and artificial intelligence is releasing much of the technical procedural work of accountants. And this is not always necessarily a bad thing, because it's releasing to accountants more time to spend on service and advice and working within teams. And when we look at what employers want, and this has been the case for quite some time, they're as much interested in professionals who are trained not only technically, but also have been trained in multifunctional group problem solving and have good group and interpersonal skills. And I would argue that much of our syllabus is in both the profession and higher education, and I'm pleased to see that they're well integrated in Portugal in that sense. There is a neglect of, that there is too much tick boxing, of trying to cover everything. And this comes at the expense of improving interpersonal skills and improving skills of critical lifelong learning, because we know the world is changing fast around us. So there are major problems here of reform, given the growing number of topics surrounding accounting and accountability, but also the time and resource constraints and different priorities of professional members. I can sympathise with the profession here, because often they are torn. For example, small firms want people to be trained that can very quickly become accountants, producing a whole range of functions within a small firm, whereas the larger firms are much more able to provide training and are much more interested in the longer-term problem skills. And this is a problem in designing the syllabus. We have a limited and constrained amount of time, but we can only produce so much. Right. Also, and I'm delighted to see that this seems to be less the case in Portugal, there is weak academic and professional practice links. And certainly in my experience, it's often we find that much of the profession and practitioners are frankly unaware of much relevant accounting research and have difficulties reading and understanding this. And this is a concern. You would expect your doctor to be able to read the latest editions of medical research appertaining to their discipline, similarly with the legal profession. And I never cease to be surprised often by practitioners who come and say, "Oh, you really ought to be researching." Well, transfer pricing. Well, most of the work on transfer pricing was pretty well exhausted by the 1970s. It's difficult to add much. Don't you realise that that subject has been possibly taken as far as it can go? And there's obviously a need for a more research and practice-based professional development. On the other hand, as academics, there is a need for much more intelligible and accessible research for an informed audience. I'm talking here about professional and practitioner people particularly, but also the wider community as well. When I first started as an academic, at Sheffield, when we did research, we always, or hopefully, got research papers in good journals published, but we also were expected to produce teaching case studies and also articles accessible to practitioners to be published in professional journals. Sadly, a lot of those avenues of dissemination have closed, or it may be that just that I'm old, we need to pay much more attention as academics to how we can diffuse and make our findings intelligible to a broader audience. It may be through podcasts. The younger generation will be able to do much better than me on this score. Come on. It's very temperamental. Can I just press this? Yeah, okay. Challenges in knowledge production. And this is important. We need much more provision and engagement in mutually beneficial research between academics and practitioners. Now, rightly or wrongly, I would maintain that academics are very unlikely to create new, efficient and effective technical accounting systems alone. There are possibly some exceptions. Kaplan on balanced scorecards and ABC come to mind, but they're relatively unusual. It's quite difficult when you're not dealing with day-to-day implementations and designing an actual organisation to devise new systems. However, academics have much to contribute. As I stated earlier, much of my research has always been observing closely and trying to work with practice to identify the problems bottom up. And even though it's often commended, there is still a lack or insufficient action research where the researcher is involved jointly with the practitioner. Practice knowledge is valuable, as I stated previously. I think one of the strengths that academics bring to this is we can systematically evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of systems, particularly new systems being peddled by consultants or international standard setters. We can provide evidence-based advice on practice changes. For example, when organisations are contemplating making changes, whether in the private or the government sector, we can draw attention to widespread research on their strengths, weaknesses, possible problems and possible advantages. I think this has really been quite sadly neglected in policy and practice circles. Also, and I don't know whether this applies to the Portuguese instance, I've been quite shocked, certainly in the UK, often to see professional reports on topics which make virtually no reference to academic knowledge on a topic, and it would be a huge advantage, I think, to a lot of the professional material being put out if there was some academic involvement in refereeing those to make sure that they were informed by contemporary research knowledge. So, Also, if we're to improve practice and academic collaboration, we need good access and publication rights being granted by firms. One of the interesting things, that when I was working in Sweden, I was visiting professor there for a while, it would not be unusual for Swedish firms to come to us and say, we've got a really interesting issue or a really interesting problem here. Would you come and do some research on this? I haven't found that else in other countries where I've worked, or certainly not to the same extent. It would be so helpful if the profession and firms were to come to us as academics and invite us and to make recommendations on issues that they would like more information on. And this is part of being a profession, because being a profession, you're developing knowledge. And you're developing knowledge not only for your members, but also for society. However, on the academic side, there is a declining willingness of academics to engage with practice due, I would argue, to performance evaluation systems in many universities. I suppose, basically, we're talking about the publish or perish syndrome. Working with practice and the practitioner takes a long time. You may not get the same high rate of publications that you would by working off large data sets, using primarily statistical work and so on. And I think the performance evaluation systems actually are proving to be, in many respects, quite damaging to the development of accounting research. And another phenomenon here, which is a problem, is there are fewer and fewer academic researchers from the profession and the practice. I don't know if this is the case in Portugal, but certainly now in a lot of the leading international research schools in accounting, it would be more important to have a PhD than perhaps practical experience and a professional qualification. And this has heightened to some extent the drift between the practice and the profession. 5 minutes, right, I'll more or less do that. So, lastly, differences in interest served. And I thought this was very well covered by Lee and Dale and some of the other people. There is growing academic concerns with many accounting professions' neglect of ethics and the prioritization of private and market interests over public interests. I can't speak again for the Portuguese profession, but if we look at, say, the chartered accountants in England and Wales, the major reason for falling foul of the ethics committee is non-payment of your subscriptions. It's very rare that any action would be taken on what I would regard more public interest abuses. And speaking on a personal note, it concerns me, particularly in the UK, how we're a centre for corruption and money laundering, which seems to go relatively unaddressed by much of the profession. But I'll leave that. So it's got to be accepted by the profession and practice that academics will pursue sometimes wider and critical and perhaps uncomfortable issues than they might seek. But that is part of the role of being an academic, and ultimately I would argue it's in the long-term interest of the profession and practice. So, what are some of the challenges facing accounting research? I don't know whether this is the case in Portugal, but certainly in Australia and Britain, New Zealand, Often accounting departments or accounting sections are cash cows. We charge very high fees to overseas students. We make a lot of money, and this then is spread to other, probably rightly to some extent, to other disciplines and other departments. Very little goes back to many of the countries from which those students come from. That's partly what motivated my interest in accounting and development. Most of my PhDs were from developing countries, and I expected them to do research on their country, not, let's say, on databases on UK or American stock markets. One of the things that we're noticing, again, I don't know whether it's the case in Portugal, but it's worrying, certainly in the English-speaking parts of academia that I know, there's an increasing drift in university accounting departments to employ teaching-only people. And this is quite attractive financially, because they could often perhaps have twice the teaching load and are sometimes cheaper. There are not many other disciplines where this would happen in a university, but this is coming at a huge cost to accounting research. It's almost a hollowing out of the accounting research base. And there is a role for teaching only people, particularly if they bring in good knowledge from the profession and practice, but the extent and the degree to which this is happening is quite concerning. Secondly, as I've mentioned, I think there are big problems in university performance evaluation systems. These militate against risky, fundamental, long-term research and developing professional and practitioner collaboration. Also, we need more research informing policy and practice. And I feel rather guilty. If there's one regret, perhaps, in my looking back on my research career, I wish I'd made more submissions to regulatory bodies and standard-setting bodies than I have done. Again, this is the sort of thing that gets driven out under performance evaluation systems. There are no brownie points or bonuses for doing this. Now, there is a growing impact on trying to measure the impact of research. I won't go into this. In theory, I think this is desirable. In practice, it's highly problematic because, as I've said previously, sometimes it might be 20 years or so before you can really assess the meaningful impact of a particular piece of research. The need for greater professional support for academic accounting research, and I can commend the profession here for launching this journal and clearly showing an interest and a concern. That can only be commended. But as I go back earlier, it isn't often just a question of money. It's a question of access and support, and particularly from their members, to get research access and publication. As also mentioned, there's a need to develop new means of disseminating research beyond academia and strengthening professional practitioner involvement. And lastly, and I'll conclude on this, I think there's some interesting possibilities perhaps emerging. And this may be something which might be much more my concern rather than a general concern, but I actually think there may be a case for two different accounting degrees. There might be two paths of qualification. There might be one degree where it is primarily based on accounting research and accounting knowledge as defined by academia, with obviously some technical training, and perhaps another in the more traditional skills-based, practice-based. The challenge really is, can we devise training and education that incorporates the growing remit of accounting alongside the need to impart technical skills in a single qualificatory process? Now, I know a lot of departments are taking great pains to incorporate issues of sustainability and gender and such forth into their syllabuses. And some of the efforts are admirable, but I think often we're only really tick boxing these rather than permeating through the whole of our curricula. And to finish, going back to what Lee and Dale were saying, I mean, given the perils facing this planet, shouldn't really sustainability be the central of our curricula? Isn't that the most important thing? And then think back on your own institution. How much of your accounting courses are spent on these issues? You will often find, well, we do it in year 3 in 2 lectures or something like that. And I just don't think that's good enough. And I'll conclude on that point. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Professor Hopper. Thank you very much. Professor Sexter, please. The floor is yours. Professor Sexter. Muito obrigado. Okay.
You can say no? You can try it.
That's fine. Okay, thank you. I'd just like to say thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's a great honor and a privilege. And to see what's in this journal, this issue, is quite astonishing. It's very, very good quality range of content, and I recommend it to you all. I'm very impressed by it. I'm just going to put this somewhere else for a minute. Can I give you that, Trevor? Right, now what I'm going to do is something very different from Trevor. I'm going to be taking you way back in history. And what I want to emphasize are 2 things: context and technology. And at the end, what really the conclusion I get to at the end is that the accounting and accounting research really is getting itself into a bit of a mess compared to, or in contrast to, where it should be. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go really fast. I apologize if at any time I go too fast. But of course, there's always recordings you can look at and so on. But what I'm really going to focus on then is what I just said, but I'm going to look at accounting and accounting education in the main. The bit in blue, we'll just skim past that. Right, if I go back, way back in time, let's just give you examples of what I'm really getting at. If you look at the various things that were done at various stages in history that we would consider a form of accounting, they change, they progress, or they just are utterly different from one period to the next. And what causes that, and this is me speaking as a historian, is the context surrounding what we would think of as accounting and the technology that was available. Now, if you look technology up on in a dictionary or online, you get told most of the time it's all about science. It's advances in science that just lead to differences in technology. It's not. It's far, far more than just science. It's all these things I've got there. And this is an abbreviation of the definition I was using here. Technologies are the key to understanding the changes that have taken place in accounting over the centuries. We start off with basic symbols just representing worth of something. Then they began to have some sort of symbolism embedded in them, and that was writing and something to write on and so on. So you got simple tokens appearing 8,000 BCE, that's 10,000 years ago. Then more complex ones 4,000 years later. Writing then came along, then you get, and you had counting as the only use of writing for quite a while. And the key thing here is the point I was making at the very beginning, context. The reason you got the simple tokens was because agriculture began to be organized. And you got the second thing there, the complex tokens appeared because cities started to emerge, which resulted in a need for organization. So you got a change in the accounting that was done. These are very early examples of clay tokens that were used. These ones have been marked, so you can tell they're not from 8,000, they're a bit newer than that. But these are tokens, and these are just pebbles that you put inside a piece of clay, and then you put it in an oven and heat it up, and that's your evidence. You've got it there, you've got it captured. And if someone doesn't believe it's evidence, you break open the cooked bit of clay, and you can prove it. That then developed, the technology developed, so you got writing. Instead of pebbles, you got actual writing on clay, which was put into clay envelopes, cooked in an oven, and when you took them out of the oven, cooled them down, anyone challenged the evidence which was written on the outside of the envelope, you could break the envelope, and the document inside the envelope confirmed what was on the envelope. It was a duplicate. So that was a system of accounting. Papyrus came along a while later, 3000 BC. Then parchment, 2500. Then you got paper, 200 before Christ. And paper is really the key to where we are today, because in 1296, the Italians discovered how to make paper that actually didn't lose its ink. The ink stayed on the paper after 1296. So suddenly everyone wanted to use paper. And the amount of documents kept exploded. And the primary keepers of documents were merchants, and they kept accounts. Handwriting is developed over the period to become more standardized, which means that we can read documents created in different places. When people were writing things in a different way, they couldn't read each other's writing. So it became better at communicating, or as evidence. The way that this developed also affected numbers. But before that, we had changes in technology. The pens started off as bits of stick, then quill pens, then fountain pens, and so on and so forth. The numbers standardized from their fairly rough roots to the point where by probably the 15th century, Italian merchants could read each other's handwriting. There was a standard, and the numbers particularly, you could read them. They were very clearly distinct. Each number was separate and clearly divisible from the rest. You got technology coming along in a way we'd recognize more willingly machines of some sort. So you got counting boards, and they date back to 3000 BC. If you turn a counting board on its side, 90 degrees, it looks like an abacus, and that, sure enough, was what came next. So you get abacus. You got the bronze abacus from the Romans, and then the more sophisticated Chinese wooden abacus. You then got a point I'll come back to later, but where you had the numbers, the numerics, counting, challenging counting boards. Which was the better technology? I'll come back to that. In the past, when it came to dissemination of this technology, the use of paper, for example, it was conquest and trade that disseminated it. And I'm going to give you a very quick example. The Muslim Empire, 8th century. It was centered in Damascus, and all the countries or areas that are not colored in yellow was that empire. The trade, just after that, was controlled by a group called Radhanites, and they were centered in Baghdad, which is there in red on the map, and their market was the bit in yellow. So it was much bigger than the area that their rulers occupied or controlled. They went right up to the north of Europe, across to China, India, and across to Spain and Portugal in the west. It was a huge market. We don't know much about it because we just look at periods much later than that. And they disseminated their technologies. After them, in the 10th and 11th century, we had a different group, still from the same region, this time centered or located in Cairo, who went beyond what we know the previous generations had done. And they started to keep accounts, and they wrote them on paper. And these have been stored so we can see what they were doing. And this is a banker's cash book from from the 1080s. So they were developing their accounting technology and making it more useful. The next generation of traders who dominated international trade in the world were the Northern Italians. And they came along when the Crusades started at the end of the 11th century. And they dominated international trade for 350 years. And they're why we do accounting the way we do it. They took all the technologies that the previous generation of traders had used. Not at the same time, it didn't transfer to them as if a line of communication had taken place. It developed in pockets in different places because they were responses to the context in which the merchants found themselves, and they just reinvented them. But the one thing the Italians didn't do was the bookkeeping. They had a different type of bookkeeping to the ones that the Maghreb traders had used before. And that was because their context was different. Their legal system was different. The Maghreb traders had no respect for documentation in the law. The Italian traders had a lot of respect for documentation, and that's why accounting really began to develop. So we get 12th century, double entry bookkeeping started. You won't find that in the literature, it's something I'm working on just now, but it's when it began. And double entry then spread itself. Now I'm going to switch across to Europe. I'm going to switch to accounting education. Until 1494, and this is now looking at Italy, which is where everything came from that we use now. Accounting was taught in a master-apprentice basis by the merchants, who were the bookkeepers, to their new apprentices, training them to take over the business later. So they got taught how to do the bookkeeping when they started their apprenticeship. Occasionally they had personal tutors. After 1494, things changed. And they changed because of one book, and I'll come to it later, but it changed towards self-taught. Then schools. By the early 15th century, you had schools in northern Italy on this topic. They never existed before. There were never any bookkeeping guilds, so it wasn't a craft in that sense. It was just something merchants did, so the merchants were the bookkeepers. The dissemination was through printing. And in the 1450s, Germans invented movable type. That came into Italy in the 1460s or end of the 50s. The earliest two known manuals or texts that talk about how to do double entry were never printed. But the third one, Luca Pacioli's, which is considered the greatest work on how to do that topic ever printed because of its influence, was printed in 1494, and everything changed thereafter. Accounting changed, and accounting education changed. We know this had an impact. Printing had a big impact on accounting. If you look at the books that were actually published, the printed books. And this is a table of editions of bookkeeping textbooks printed between 1501 and 1800 in the world. There's 882 of these books, editions of these books. And I'll come back to numbers of books in a minute. Now, if you look at them, you can see where accounting was becoming more of interest, where people were beginning to learn how to do it by teaching themselves, or were going to schools and being taught. And as you progress through it, if you focus on the Great Britain column, you see what happens. London became the capital of international trade at the beginning of the 18th century. So between 1701 and 1750, European centre of trade. The number of editions of textbooks more than doubled in those 50 years compared to the 50 before. Then, at the second half of the 18th century, it became the centre of finance. It was the market for money in the world at that point, and they doubled again. That's people wanting to learn how to do bookkeeping and use it, so the explosion of it happened there on the back of the technology of printing. The number of copies that were sold, we have enough data to estimate that. It was between 250,000 and 500,000 in the 100-year period of the 18th century in Britain. And this is somewhere that really we didn't think they did much accounting back then using this method, but they did. So the technology moved on the back of accounting, moved on the back of printing. Up to 1800, however, it was a mixture of manuals, classroom tuition, and most of all workplace tuition. It was no different from the end of the 15th century in that respect. accounting education was still largely done in the workplace, although a lot more people were prepared, like they are today when they do accounting degrees, they're prepared with some knowledge of accounting to go into the accounting world. Bookkeeping was also different in different places. So you can't just look and say, well, that's the way that things changed. The modern accounting all came that way. It didn't. In India, they had a different system, Baikata. We don't know much about that, about what it was like in the old days. In Peru, they had the Inca Quipu, which were just pieces of string. They even had a double entry system of sorts, using pieces of knotted string. And he had the Turkish stairs method, which was a completely different method again. None of these were really double entry bookkeeping. Only the one that we use is that one. Now, just going back a little bit. In 1200, skills began to replace technology. And what skills, you might think? Because all I've talked about is technology. Well, the skill was mathematics. The Italians, northern Italians, started schools for merchants' children on applied mathematics, mathematics for business. They didn't teach them accounting or bookkeeping, just maths. And the merchants relied on this because trade was extremely complex. And in order to manipulate a huge range of different currencies, weights, measures, shapes, and all sorts of things, they had to learn very complex arithmetic, algebra, geometry. And they did. And they could do it in their heads. It was a phenomenal level of skill. On the other side were the traditionalists who used counting boards. The Italian merchants who dominated Europe for 350 years at least didn't use the counting boards. But if you look at the accounting textbooks up into the 18th century, up into the 19th century, a lot of them have sections about counting boards. Because there was always this, well, we can do it easier if we just use a counting board. Like nowadays, well, we can do it easier because we've got a calculator. But the real experts were the ones that learned how to do all the techniques themselves. So for a little while, skill dominated. Then, 1640, technology began to really take hold on business and on accounting. Pascal arithmetic machine. No longer needed to do the maths, could use a machine to do it. By the late 19th, 20th century, you had adding machines and quantometers that made addition and subtraction really simple. And then, by the 1960s, your desktop calculators came in. Big impact on accounting and on the way accountants could manipulate data. What accounting could do could increase thereafter. So you had things like the accounting machine of the 1920s, this is, but it was the early 20th century. It was phenomenal in what it could do, and it was still in use in the 1970s. I know that because I saw them being used when I was training as an accountant. Computer technology, however, is the big impact on accounting and should be on accounting education. The technology of von Neumann's architecture for computing sort of set the baseline. The first electronic computer, 1946. That's in the United States, British one in 1949. And then you got the first business computer in 1951, which was for a company that manufactured cakes, bolos, but it's Logesdale. For the cake shops of Britain, they got their first business computer. It must have cost a lot of money. 1970s, we had already got the small computers for home use, and we got the big, massive computers you just saw. There had to be something in the middle. So by the 1970s, we had it. We had the VAX 11780 and a whole range of others. And they had business accounting software, FCS EPS. I did this in the early 80s, FCS EPS on a VAX 11. And I did the whole of the budget for Scotland, for the gas company, the National Gas Company, on my own, where previously 12 people had done it by hand. That was the sort of impact we had then with computers. Now take that to the present day and think about, well, how long would it take people doing it by hand to do all this stuff? Massive international consolidations, no chance. So it's made a huge difference, computing. First spreadsheet made a big difference to the way accountants work in practice. By the middle of the 80s, I read somewhere that there was 98% of American top 500 companies, all the accountants are using spreadsheets, 98% of the companies. That was within 10 years. Innovations then, technology began to take hold and changing, impacting accounting. We had artificial intelligence, first really talked about by Turing in the 1940s. Neural networks, 1950s. Expert systems, 1970s. And I'm sorry I'm going so fast. The internet and World Wide Web came at the end of the 80s. You had the proposal for the World Wide Web, what we all think of when we get a browser. We open up Chrome or Safari or something like that, and that's the World Wide Web we're looking at. That's only 30 years old. And it dominates our lives, dominates the lives of our children and our grandchildren, because it's there and it's full of information. Accounting has eventually grabbed it. It took it a long time. Accounting's delayed for about 10, 15 years after it started to really grasp it and use it. But when they did, it changed a lot. We had ERP. Trevor mentioned ERP. Started as materials requirement planning in the 1960s. Computer system, but for a very narrow focus. In the 1990s, just at the same time World Wide Web was opening up and the internet was opening up, you got ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning Systems, where you had multi-disciplines all coming into one database, where if you were the accountant, you could interrogate the marketing data, the production data, and you could do a lot better job. All that became possible only then, so 30 years ago, 3-0. Now, I did a study 20 years ago, which looked at multinational companies based in Britain, looking at their ERP installations with programs like SAP. And we looked at some literature, and the literature told us this. An ERP system implementation changes management accounting and changes both the practice and the people. In our study, what we found was that if it was a successful installation of ERP, it could be a massive change. And in fact, in one of the companies we visited and looked at, they had a management accounting department of a specialist department of about 20 staff. 6 months after they implemented the ERP system, they sacked the entire staff of that department and replaced them with people that knew about computers. They didn't need the accountants nearly as much. They needed the computing expertise. And that was confirmed by what we found about the skills you needed. And Trevor talked about this briefly as well. We found, and this was 600 people who were impacted by ERP implementations responding to a questionnaire, that these were the 3 key skills in an ERP environment. Where's accounting in that lot? Where's accounting in this lot? It's interpersonal skills, consulting, IT skills, software skills, interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills are always important in the literature for accounting education and accounting. And there it is at the top. But where's accounting? It's, if you count, it's 13th in the list of 14. Accounting knowledge, not important in an ERP environment. It's important in a little bit, but not enough. So priority in recruitment to fill the other skills. So advances in technology is changing business processes. If you just take something quite simple, internet banking and telephone banking before it, the top 2 there. Telephone banking 1980s, that impacted how banks operated and how their customers operated. And I knew someone who was right in the beginning, and he used to dial in from home in the early 80s to his bank, and for fun. But the banks were changing in what they did, and then in the 90s you got internet banking, and it really had a sea change. The amount of data that was suddenly flowing about, that the banks had at their disposal for analysing their business, doing better, making better decisions, it was quite phenomenal. And it made it more accessible, the banking information more accessible to business. So impacted what businesses wanted, what business could do. One example of academics and practice working together. Continuous audit was invented by this man, Nicholas Vassarelli, in 1989. He's a professor at Rutgers University, but he also was employed by AT&T, the big phone company, Bell Labs, in the United States. And he developed continuous audit, which meant they no longer had to have people in physical human beings checking all the data that was going through this massive database. They just put in computers to a computer system to do it. Massively changed that type of work. Again, going back to diffusion, how did that get diffused? Those new technologies and those new processes. I'll come to that in a minute, but nowadays we can look at things that have just been introduced and we know why they're there. We know where the ideas came from. What happened here was that the academic got together with the business, with the industry, profession, and set up a series of international conferences which have been running now for basically 30 years. And it's up in high 50s, number of conferences, 1 to 2 a year. The audience is about 150 practitioners, that's accounting practitioners. About 100, this is just proportionally, about 100 would be specialists in IT, software and all the rest of it, and the rest academics. So if you're an audience of 200, take the numbers down. But it's a mixed audience, so the feedback, the sort of cutting edge awareness of the technology that the professionals get and the industry gets and the specialists get and the academics get means this is a very healthy development for accounting and for the future of what we do. Now, the impact of new technology, new processes in accounting education, I'm going to go really fast now. These are sorts of things that have been happening over the last 70 years, since the 1950s. The shift from a traditional accounting context, integrating accounting technologies, real-world exemplars, case studies, adoptions of technologies in teaching. All of this has been very slow, very, very slow, and very patchy, some in, some out. Databases came into the accounting curriculum in the 80s and universities, disappeared in the 80s out of universities, came and went. Programming came and went. Audit packages came, hung about for a while, never really got developed, and so on. Accounting educators have been very slow to adapt or to adopt, and some very weak, are very weak with the technologies, technically and pedagogically. Accounting academics in general do not know how to use the technology in their teaching to help their students learn about the technology in the accounting. There is a real barrier there that's never been overcome. So in my opinion, and I'm really talking from a UK perspective, right, not a Portuguese perspective, accounting education is still very much in the pre-computer age. It's still in the 1980s in the way we teach and the topics we teach and how we teach. It's not a good place to be for what's coming next, because next, professional bypass, where we don't need accountants anymore, was first predicted that I'm aware of in 1987. Technology is removing the need for accountants from about 2010 onwards, and Trevor already alluded to this. There's a lot being written about this. Technology has the potential to remove all need for accountants now. There's no need for any accountants, because technology's got it all. So what is it that accountants need to do in future to reinforce their position and maintain their leadership? Well, these are the sorts of things we should be teaching the students, soft skills and all the rest of it. We need to get them to understand what they really need to understand that would give them an edge over the other people coming from other disciplines, that would inform the profession of the future if they take these skills into it and develop it as they're going through. Technology should define the curriculum and all its aspects, because it's technology that's driving the change that accountants are facing. Accounting educators need to be aware of that and do something about it, and we need the profession to lead on that, because we are very slow to take a lead. Over the next 50 years, change will happen, but it won't happen in the way that it needs to happen. I'll come back to that. The accounting profession has a similar problem, and this is a British problem. I'm specifically saying here, I'm sure it's very different, and from what I can see of what I've seen today, it is different here. But the profession needs to wake up and start taking risks and chances and pushing the envelope, moving into a new direction where they can take their business acumen, data analyticals, their ability with data, the analytical abilities they've got, their knowledge of accounting and its frameworks, and become business solution professionals, which no other discipline can do in the way accountants can do it. And that's the future I believe the profession should go. And if it does, then things will change. But almost all accountants resist change, so it needs mavericks in the profession, mavericks in the universities to do this. Technology makes everything possible. All that's needed is accounting and accounting educators care. So, if I come back in 2070, if we all come back in 2072, what will we find? Will all this happen that I'm talking about? I think we'd see too much of what we see today. I don't think we're going to change in time, and I really worry for the future of accounting profession, because it'll lose its identity as other disciplines take over what it does. So my message here is change. Make a big change and move forward. If you change, grasp all the opportunities available and widen what you do as accountants, you've got a real future, because the other disciplines will be way behind. They think they can take over. They don't realize what skills accountants really have. Finally, research. On research, Trevor's gone into this in quite some detail, but I just wanted to say a few words that I jotted down this morning while I was thinking about this, because I hadn't really written about it. We need to break free from the rankings that constrain what we publish. We need to get rid of all that. They've already got something in academic circles called, I've forgotten what it's, DORA, which is meant to be a system whereby the universities ignore the rankings. That's never going to work. The research needs to focus on relevance to the future. Accounting academics spend too much time looking at the past. And I'm speaking as a historian. I think it's interesting, but it's not what's needed really for the future. We need to start being blue skies in our research. Look at our potential, possibilities, and be much more qualitative in our research, not do number crunching. It's this analysis of financial reports and data from the stock market is not helping the future. We need to move from the technical, researchers need to move from the technical towards the whole. Researchers are looking at trees, individual trees. What they need to look at is the forest, the big picture. And I think if we do that, if accounting researchers start looking at the big picture and stop drilling down on angels on pinheads, then research will start to really inform practice in the way that Miklos Vassarelli did with continuous audit. We have the potential, we just got to realize it. And with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Trevor and Alan. So we still have 5 minutes for discussion. So I will open discussion to the floor.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. So my question is related with the future of our profession. So the border between different jobs are blurring, and how you see our profession future?
And in terms of our profession, I think, there's blurring, but I think that's an opportunity for us, the accounting profession, not the academics, the accounting professionals, to actually start to take over some of their activities. We have an added value that we bring to any party. That's why we're so popular with the others, because we give them things they can't do, they think. But we have the ability to do a lot of things they do, but we haven't recognized it yet. I mean, for example, what could we do with a marketing database? We know how to analyze data. We could do that. We don't need specialists in marketing to do all that. We could do it. So just spread. But I think the thing that we really need to do is to forget about discipline and just think of business or government, whatever sector you want to be in. But just think of business. What does business really need that we have the talents to do well and move in that direction? And the one thing we've always done is we've always been consultants. So let's develop that line and make the accounting profession a profession of consultancy, where we can advise business on anything that relates to anything connected with data, because data is our forte.
No. It's on, yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. I actually think there's quite exciting prospects, going back to Alan's, if you're more adventurous. And actually, if you look at the breadth of some of the accounting research, I think there's a lot there that shows pointers to the future. But I think that obviously SDGs are going to be absolutely important. I've also got a colleague I've worked with a lot in the USA, Jesse Dillard, and his argument would be it's not accounting, it's accountability that's important. And there's a whole series of issues throughout society where we're seeing insufficient accountability. Just to give one, not sure if it's relevant to accounting, is the lack of accountability on internet postings, for example. certainly in the UK, there's a dire lack of accountability of members of Parliament. And we can go on. There are huge areas where we've much to offer and we're learning about, but to go back, and I think the same point that Alan's made is, it's just not being reflected in what we teach and train people to do. And I think this is, and I fully appreciate the constraints of time and resources. It's a tricky task. It's a tricky task, but there's not enough thought being given to this.
Thank you for the very interesting presentations. Trevor, you mentioned that there is a need for better and closer collaboration with between academics and practitioners. You mentioned, for instance, action research. Since we are here on a situation where we are talking with a professional body, what is, in your opinion, what can be done, what could be helpful to make these links more possible?
Good question. I was intrigued by Alan's example of the auditing meetings. One thing that I tried at Manchester but was unsuccessful is at what was then UMIST, the production or operations management people. They had a regular monthly meeting with production managers. And that monthly evening meeting would be the production managers would give a short presentation stroke paper, but more a presentation on some of the issues and problems that they were facing. And then the academics would comment on it. And you thought it's a kind of vice versa. I tried to do that at Manchester and I just couldn't get the people in the local industry and the profession interested. Now, going back to Alan's point, technology plays an instance here. There may be other ways, but I think certainly at the moment we do not have very good avenues of collaboration. And when I look at other professional bodies, these are much stronger, much stronger. And I'm not entirely sure why this is the case. Is it because so much of our practice people are interested in the short run, the commercial interest or the quick payoff? I don't know. But there must be ways of improving this.
So still time for another question.
Thank you. Just a question for the Professor Maria João Major. Taking into account the restrictions of the Portuguese tax supervisors on the contability, on the accountancy, what do you think about the open mind of these amazing professors in the context of the specific Portuguese situation? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understood well your question. I think it's a very wide question that we could discuss that for a long time. But obviously, I fully agree that there is a space for putting together academia and practice and all the organizational bodies and professional bodies. And that if we put together all these different parts of society, I'm sure not probably, but the likelihood of getting something that can help the society is considerable. So I think that it's really important that we develop and we think of strategies to involve more frequently every stakeholder of society and all these different, I would say, bodies and institutions and individuals, in order that together they can sort out a way of getting more value to society using accounting. Because accounting is an important discipline, as all of us know. It's not just a technical discipline, it's much more than that. Has a big impact on people, on their everyday work and life. And in order that there are more progress for society and more efficiency and value, outside social value, it's important that all these stakeholders, let me name them in this way, work together. And I would say that the challenge is how to do this. I think we need to think about spaces and probably places like this and events like this can be a good opportunity to start bridging academia, practitioners, professional bodies, and together to work out in order to get something better for everyone. Yeah, not sure if I answered to your question, but this is my view, my perspective. So I think that we don't have more time for discussion. I'm really sorry about that. So, Dr. João, I think we need to conclude because we are running out of time.
Exactly. We still have 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Professor Hopper, Professor Sangster. It was a pleasure to hear your insights. Foi prazer. Muito obrigado. Pedi à professora Maria João Major para não sair. I'll kindly ask you to join the closing session seated more comfortably. E chamava a senhora bastonária, a doutora Paula Franco, para passarmos imediatamente para a sessão de encerramento. Senhora bastonária, a professora Maria João Major, muito obrigado. Faça um favor.
Hoje estamos na reta final aqui da nossa conferência. Sem dúvida que são estes os momentos que nos fazem crescer, que nos fazem refletir e que, acima de tudo, nos fazem estar agradecidos pela profissão que escolhemos. Foi uma conferência com um interesse enorme e destacaria aqui algumas partes que acho que são importantes destacarmos, nomeadamente tudo aquilo que o Trevor disse em relação à parte científica, académica e a ligação à prática, que é uma coisa que aqui em Portugal nos esquecemos, e espero que a Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados seja cada vez mais impulsionadora dessa ligação, porque, de facto, da academia vêm os profissionais e vem o estudo científico daquilo que às vezes é necessário para resolver determinadas operações e como as refletir nas nossas demonstrações financeiras. O exemplo que deu, por exemplo, da Suécia, e de quando as empresas de grande dimensão e com problemas no reconhecimento de algum tipo de operações que recorrem à academia para se conseguir tirar ou trazer a solução ideal para a materialização e para o reconhecimento dessas operações é essencial. E é algo que aqui em Portugal temos que utilizar cada vez mais, esta ligação entre aquilo que é a investigação, que é fundamental em qualquer área e que na contabilidade tem cada vez uma importância maior. E por isso tudo aquilo que foi aqui relevado e mencionado pelo Trevor é importantíssimo nessa ligação que temos que fazer cada vez mais entre a prática, entre os profissionais e a academia. Também, em relação ao Alan, o Alan fez-nos aqui, thank you Alan, thank you Trevor, o Alan fez-nos aqui uma viagem pela história da contabilidade, desde os seus primórdios. Eu diria que sempre existiu, a contabilidade e a informação financeira nunca teve desligado de tudo aquilo que é a realidade comercial, empresarial, ainda que nos tempos em que isso não se chamava dessa forma, mas que já havia a necessidade de se materializar algo, de se quantificar, e portanto sempre existiu e sempre existirá. E aqui leva-me para além daquilo que foi a caminhada pelo passado, àquilo que queremos hoje, e que também é um tema da conferência, que é o futuro da contabilidade. E também algumas das perguntas que se refletiram aqui no público, e realmente seja por via da digitalização de tudo aquilo que utilizamos em termos de facilidade com o que hoje temos em termos de instrumentos ao nosso dispor, acima de tudo, gostaria de deixar aqui uma reflexão sobre também aqui o futuro da contabilidade, visto na nossa perspectiva portuguesa, em que, e não é só portuguesa, porque, como sabem, acabei agora de chegar do nosso congresso internacional na Índia, em que juntou muitas organizações congêneres de todo o país, e uma realidade, e de facto toda a discussão tem a certeza desta realidade, que os contabilistas são importantíssimos, não só aqui em Portugal, como em todo o mundo, e cada vez mais necessários nos países, para o desenvolvimento dos países, para o desenvolvimento das empresas e para o crescimento económico tão necessário para a sustentabilidade de tudo o resto. A sustentabilidade é um tema-chave, o Alan também se referiu a isso, é o futuro, é aquilo a que temos que nos dedicar, é ainda um bocadinho longe da nossa prática diária, mas que cada vez mais se torna uma realidade. Assunto discutido em todo o mundo, aliás, o tema do Congresso na Índia também foi a sustentabilidade, à semelhança do nosso Congresso também aqui em Lisboa, e de facto é um tema que traz grandes preocupações que têm que deixar de ser chavões, de ser apenas preocupações em que cada um de nós pensa que não tem nada a ver com a nossa realidade, e começarmos a incorporar mais estes conceitos. Sem dúvida que o futuro da contabilidade é um futuro cada vez mais importante, e dos contabilistas, porque em todo o mundo cada vez mais é dada uma relevância e uma importância àquilo que os contabilistas significam nos países, nas empresas e em cada uma das realidades de cada país. Sem dúvida que a pandemia trouxe trouxe para a primeira linha os contabilistas de todo o mundo. Aqui em Portugal foi exatamente o mesmo, mas nos outros países do mundo também. E verificou-se a importância da informação financeira nos momentos chaves e a importância de um conhecedor, de um profissional que consiga acompanhar as realidades e as preocupações do momento. E acho que o contabilista do futuro também é um bocadinho isto. É o contabilista, é o profissional que se vai adaptar àquilo que são as necessidades, como disse e bem o Alan, das empresas e do negócio. É este o lugar dos contabilistas certificados, é este o lugar que temos que cada vez mais reforçar aqui na nossa sociedade portuguesa, que é aquela onde atuamos e onde podemos fazer a diferença. Portanto, espero que cada um de nós faça a diferença. O futuro é aquilo que nós quisermos, temos-lo na nossa mão, as decisões são nossas, mas estou certa que para a contabilidade e para os contabilistas certificados o futuro é muitíssimo risonho. E que a Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados aqui estará para acompanhar todo este processo, começando também por esta grande iniciativa que muito nos orgulha hoje de manhã e que nos deixam aqui reflexões muito importantes, e por isso agradeço a todos a vossa presença, e de facto é um orgulho enorme tê-los aqui, ter esta conferência, ter o Alan e o Trevor com explicações e com uma intervenção fantástica que nos deixa de alma cheia, e agradeço a todos a vossa presença. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Trevor. I would like to thank you for your presence, especially for you two, for your speakers, and who raised the level of our profession. Thank you. You are amazing, and I enjoy a lot everything that you say. Thank you very much. All the best for all. Thank you.
Okay, so just to finish, I would say that today we had two excellent presentations by Professor Trevor and Professor Alan Sangster, and I'm sure that their insightful presentations have contributed to enlarge our understanding on accounting. I would say that even though accounting is still described by some as a technical and neutral tool that seeks to identify, measure, and communicate information, and to inform judgments and decisions by users of information, there is a growing recognition that it represents a powerful device. It's a powerful device that allows the creation, the shape, and legitimation of practice. And we have explored this perspective here today, during this morning. And I'm sure that all of us are going to use all this knowledge in our professions. I would like to close the session by thanking again all support that the Accounting and Management Review has received, saying to Professor Trevor Hopper and Professor Alan Sangster that we are very grateful for coming and sharing your knowledge with us, and also for thanking you your presence in this special event. And I'm going to end my presentation by presenting another video, so it's the last video today, no more videos I promise, at least in the event, which reports the views of the Accounting and Management Review, Editorial Advisor Board, on the key challenge for accounting research in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
We think that a key challenge is to become relevant to issues that communities face and to contribute to the general community debate, and then ultimately to provide an influence upon and input to policy and practice formation. There are two major issues of community concern that are linked. So the issue of privatisation of formerly public sector power provision and the impacts on environment and climate of power generation, turning it into sustainable sources. So those two big areas of research are interlinked, and there has been in the past, and there remains, a huge potential for accounting researchers, management researchers, and AMR to make big contributions to these issues in the area of public debate and public policy formation.
To be honest, is to keep it going, because accounting is often seen as a type of a pedestrian technical thing. It's something you have to be good at. You may not necessarily be required to be a great thinker. I think accounting needs to become a thinking profession, and then it does things after that. So I think we need accounting to exist and grow and develop in our universities and in our other higher education institutions. Because if it doesn't, it may end up being treated in a fairly perfunctory way, in which case we must keep going and further develop and make more readable accounting research, because it's not just about accounting, it's about what goes on in the world.
we can research the past and we can research the present. And looking at the past helps to illuminate the present and give us an idea of where we might be going in the future. And this becomes increasingly important given the challenges that the world faces of all sorts of diverse natures, and accounting needs to be central to dealing with these challenges. We need to be sure that the accounting methods that we're developing and applying in practice are able to show us and help us to control the problems that we're facing. And so accounting research that simply emphasizes what organizations have done in the past may not be all that we need. We need to see how the past has influenced the present we're currently in and the future that we might be trying to achieve.
Accounting research in the 21st century is intensely competitive. There are too few refereed journals, and there are too many academics chasing them, often under immense pressure from university managers. The pressure in accounting is particularly acute because in accounting there are much fewer highly ranked journals compared to other business disciplines such as management or marketing. So I'll end this recording by wishing you every success in your research, which is very challenging but also very enjoyable.
Daqui um bocadinho o protocolo já não era para ser eu a falar, mas esqueci-me de algumas coisas, estava tão entusiasmada com a própria conferência que depois às vezes nos passam também algumas informações importantes, nomeadamente o agradecimento a toda esta equipa que tornou isto possível e que tornou a possibilidade deste lançamento desta revista possível, e destacaria, claro, a professora Maria João Major, que durante todo este ano se dedicou de forma quase exaustiva a este projeto para que isto fosse tudo possível, o professor Carlos Menezes, a professora Delfina, a professora Ruth e a professora Susana, para que chegássemos ao ponto de hoje. Também aos nossos colaboradores internos, ao Duarte Camacho e à Paula Francisco, que apoiaram este projeto e que o acompanharam também intensamente para que tudo isto fosse possível. Para termos uma revista científica com reconhecimento a nível internacional, era fundamental termos uma plataforma. Foi logo aquilo que foi o nosso primeiro tema inicial quando começámos a recuperar este projeto. Tudo isto não é fácil, não é propriamente... Hoje esta apresentação resultou de um trabalho de um ano inteiro. Há um ano que se começou tudo isto, um ano de investimentos, quer pessoais, quer financeiros, para hoje termos aqui este projeto que permite que esta revista tenha uma plataforma que lhe traz a credibilidade necessária para se tornar numa revista de reconhecimento científico a nível internacional. Nada disto que parece fácil é fácil, resultou de muito trabalho. E por isso agradeço a todas as equipas envolvidas, porque aquilo que nós queremos aqui na Ordem dos Contabilistas Certificados é exigência, é futuro e é acompanharmos sempre e estarmos na vanguarda de todas as situações. E por isso agradeço muito a todos os envolvidos, porque sem todos vós não seria possível. Muito obrigada. Concluímos a conferência. Muito obrigada a todos e até à próxima.